Hello, this is incredible. I am so glad to see so many familiar and unfamiliar faces filling this room. This is absolutely incredible. Welcome to the Wellington County Museum and Archives for this very special event. My name is, in case you don't know me, my name is Kyle Smith. I'm the activity programmer here at the museum, which is why I've got all the kindergarten claps and all the rest of it all down. We're so happy to have you guys here. I'm going to be emceeing tonight, and this is just one of those events that I'm so excited about. You know, the title of the book and the title of the award-winning exhibit that we have here is "If These Walls Could Speak," and we all know they can't. Walls don't speak. But one of the things that I sort of view as my job, and I know a lot of the other people here at the museum do, is that, you know, it's our job to give voice to these walls. It's our job to give voice to the people who lived here, who spent their lives here, and who helped to build this community that we all love. And I am good at talking, but not so good at doing original research, which is why I rely on many of the people in this audience who I know do lots of original research on Wellington County's history, and especially the star of the show tonight, Susan Dunlop, who's done such an incredible job of putting, yeah, everybody. Please. So this night is a celebration of her and the hard work that she put in to create this incredible book that all of you can take home with you and take the story of the poorhouse back with you and remember. And it's just it's a celebration of her. It's a celebration of the people who lived here and those pioneers of Wellington County who built the community, like I said, that we all love today. So we're going to jump right in. To introduce Susan, I would first like to call up Yenna Burns, the administrator of Wellington Place.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Yenna Burns, and on behalf of the Museum and Archives, I'd like to welcome you tonight. It is so wonderful to be together in this beautiful space in person and on a very momentous occasion. I'd like to thank you for joining us for this event in a very special year. 2022 represents 145 years since the opening of the County House of Industry and Refuge. We hear it all the time. People drive past our site. They're struck by the beauty and architecture of the incredible building that sits so stoic on top of the hill. And for years, the talented staff here have done a remarkable job of telling the stories of the people and events that were part of this space. But for the first time ever, we're able to offer our residents and visitors the opportunity to learn new stories, untold stories of the unwed mothers, the abandoned children, the harsh realities, and even the happy moments that form the history of the poorhouse. Those that know Susan Dunlop won't be surprised with the caliber of work she's delivered with this book that we're unveiling tonight. The amount of research and her capacity to encapsulate the material into this fantastic book is worthy of great praise. I'd also like to thank Karen Wagner and Haley Johnston for the amount of work they put into this project and for the staff here for organizing this event. Finally, I think it's really noteworthy that this property has been in the hands of one owner since 1877, namely the County of Wellington. County Council has continued this history of supporting our very significant spaces. And I'd like to thank our county councilors present tonight because they have also made this project possible. I'd like to say welcome to County Councilor and Chair of our Information Heritage and Seniors Committee, Councilor Mary Lloyd, as well as Councilor Jeff Duncan. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Susan Dunlop.
Actually, yes, but just before we get started, before Susan gets started, I would just like to remind everyone, please, if you have cell phones, to put them on silent. I see lots of people moving in pockets, so that's good. If you do want to take any pictures, Susan has said that it's totally okay for you to take pictures. That's fine. Just please no flash photography. Other than that, there is going to be a question period at the end. So if you do have any questions, I'm going to be coming around with the microphone to make sure we get everyone who has some questions. But that will be at the end. So just hold your questions until the end.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome here tonight. It is so nice to be back. And I just want to extend my thanks to Jana Burns and to Kyle. Thank you. And to all of the Wellington County staff. So many have put this night together. I'm going to go into a little more depth later on as I get talking about the process, but I wanted to thank County Council for their support and the Heritage Committee, Mary, who is here tonight as our chair, and Adam, who has us connected up with Zoom, and great to have people that are Zooming in tonight. So we'll be getting their questions later, I'm sure, too. So without further ado, we created this book to fill a need. When we created the exhibit in 2007, I would be sitting down in my office downstairs by the front desk, and we would be hearing people coming down the stairs quite often saying, is there something that we can read? Is there another book, something to take home that we can, reflect on and learn more? And from what I know, that has continued. People have wanted this. So this book is a companion piece to the 2007 exhibit, If These Walls Could Speak. We wanted to explore in more depth the early experiences of rural poverty and poor relief that still influence our attitudes and policies to this day, and tell it through the personal stories of those who lived here. But for anyone who has researched history, you know, and it's something I really realized researching about the poorhouse, is that it's like a jigsaw puzzle, and some of the pieces are missing. In particular, the voices of the marginalized and the disempowered who were rarely listened to. They didn't think anyone wanted to hear their voices. They didn't leave us any diaries or letters. So we're trying to fill in that story, and we can only do, what we can do. When we look at this cover photo of the book, there's about 60 people in this, on the front and on the back. And they would be astonished that we are here tonight. They wouldn't believe that we are interested. And one of the, I've been looking at so many photographs doing this book, that one of the ahas that I have had really just this week is that they are sitting right along this wall. So that photograph was being taken, give or take, maybe back a few feet, but the stone wash house that is the back wall where the inmates are seated, these 4 rows of inmates, it is right along this wall. And so I kind of think that they are here with us tonight. And I wonder what answers we would give them if they asked us what has changed in 145 years. I wanted just to explain about the official name, the House of Industry and Refuge, and I just added this detail at the top that you can see says County Poorhouse. And so everyone who came into this house knew that that was the name of the house, even though the official name, House of Industry and Refuge, but they were all known as poor houses, the 9 rural poor houses across southern Ontario. And people continued to live here until 1971, but the dates for this book are to 1947, because that is when the 1947 date refers to the official change of the name to Home for the Aged. And of course, that also changes attitudes through that time. So in 1947, the issues of poverty, they hoped that they were being addressed, but they also hoped that the stigma and the shame of the name poorhouse had ended. Words matter. Their meaning also evolves over time. As the times change, so do labels that we apply to people and ideas. These headings in the admission register, I hope you can see them: pauper, vagrant, idiot. They describe those who had fallen on misfortune through no fault of their own or born to misfortune, and also those, the name vagrant, who needed to correct their behavior. And I've already used the word inmate, and I did want to explain a little bit about that, put that in context. When we first started doing the research 16 years ago, we were kind of appalled that the people were being called inmate. But actually, it's a very neutral historical term. You look in the 1861 census, and it doesn't say name of person at the top, the category. It says inmate. You were an inmate of your home. People who stayed in a hospital or an asylum or a poorhouse, they were inmates. That's all that the term meant. But by the turn of the century, 1910s, it became more associated with prisons, and it was considered offensive to the elderly that were now in these homes. And so by 1920, in the 1920s, resident gradually became the accepted term. But I will continue to use that term throughout the early years of this talk, so I just wanted to explain that. Now, I never thought that I would ever be giving a talk where I would have a picture of myself 8 feet high in a slideshow, and in fact, I don't even want to look up there to see the size of this photo, but I put it in there. I had this set up. Someone in the archives took this for me because the process, this book was written and researched during the pandemic, and as all of you know, it made everything difficult. It affected the process very much. So for many months at a time, the archives was closed. The staff were working at home. And when it did reopen, and then, you know, it would have to close again and reopen, but there was restricted availability. So where you have, 8 microfilm readers, only one person could be on them at a time. And you had to do that by appointment. So everything slowed down, and with very good reason. We had to follow those, respect those issues of health and safety for all of us. But also the Ontario Archives was closed. I wanted to go there to do some research. They usually do microfilm loans, and there was no such thing. So that's something that I look forward to. But the staff support has just been amazing throughout this kind of difficult process through the pandemic. And I know that no one likes me to point them out or make them stand up, so maybe I won't make you stand up, Patty. What do you think? Would you like to stand up? Or I do see you sitting there at the back. So glad you could come tonight. So before Patty, Juan, who was our conservator and created the model on the landing and did so much work and care of this site. She knows the site and its history as well as I do, as well as anyone on staff. And after she, even before she retired, but during her retirement, she has read every word of the many editions of these chapters and given me very thoughtful feedback. And I appreciate it so much, Patty. My main go-to people on the staff were archivist Karen Wagner and curator Haley Johnson. I think Karen is in the archives, which that's too bad. I guess she's over there. And I don't know if Haley is. She's in the bathroom, isn't she? No. Yeah. Okay, that's okay. I'll just go ahead. Without their leadership of Haley and Karen, this book would not have happened. Gee, it'd be so nice if she was up here to hear this, but I can give her a copy after. None of us in the pandemic has had an easy time, you know, like with researching, but Karen and Haley found ways to make this book happen. And if you have a chance to chat with them, thank them for their dedication and professionalism, because without them, this book would not have happened. So Haley is standing in the doorway there, Haley Johnson. And a big thank you to you, Haley, you know. I wanted to just tell you a little bit about the sources. When I began my research again with the exhibit in 2006, I was really very surprised and puzzled that there were no books, there were no articles about the history of these rural poorhouses, how they were run, who was admitted. It was like they had been forgotten, a forgotten part of our history. And that has been one of the motivating factors for all of us, is that this story needs to be told. So I just listed there some of the selection of the documents that were used in my research. And through these, we learned about changing social attitudes, the evolution of government intervention in people's welfare. And more importantly, we were able to catch glimpses of people's lives. And some of the documents were a little more fun to find, like this caricature of keeper William Griffin. He was the keeper from 1884 to 1919. And this caricature was done by J.W. Bengow, who was quite a famous caricaturist from Toronto. He would go around Ontario giving lectures and draw people as he went. And this is telling us Keeper Griffin is seen as one of the leading, lights in the community. Among the most important of the original documents are the house registers. So the admissions, discharges, burials, the visitor registers. But even this information is incomplete. And no wonder. This was a working farm, filled with people with a lot of special needs, many who were ill, many who were dying, children. There was not time to be spending time filling out every little detail of the registers. So that in itself was interesting to learn. They were also supposed to have an apparel register. The keeper was to keep a record of everything that the inmates wore, what they brought in, what was made for them. Well, who would have had time for that? There was no such thing as an apparel register. But these visitor registers are a remarkable collection of documents. And there were sometimes as many as 150 visitors from all over the world, South America, Africa, all over Europe. It's really quite amazing. I think they would come to visit people in Elora and, in the county, but close in the vicinity here. And they'd have a slow day, so they'd say, well, let's go to the poorhouse and go through it. And I just wonder if it's kind of like in the 1970s when the CN Tower, if you had someone visit, you would take them to the CN Tower. I put up this photo. This is Matron Griffin in the early years, about 1889, with her baby daughter, Olive. She raised 5 children in the house, 4 or 5 children. And below the baby's hand, you can see a little bit of white. We can see it so well in a magnifying glass. But that is the visitor's register. They are at the front entrance. That's where people would have signed the register. And this was unidentified, this slide, by John Connon, this photograph. And we spent a lot of time looking at people's under magnifying glasses at their eyes, their ears, their teeth, trying to match up photographs. So we do know that this was Matron Griffin. We are incredibly fortunate at this site with the wealth of photographs portraying the house, the staff, and the residents. One photographer in particular, many of you will know John Connon from Elora, born in 1862, died in 1931. He was a gifted photographer, inventor, historian. He was also a friend of the Griffin family. By the way, he's standing. The Griffin, Mr. and Mrs. Griffin, are seated, and he is the man who is standing. So the Griffins came here in 1884. They were members of St. John's Anglican Church in Elora, as was Mr. Connon. They were a musical family, as was John Connon. And so I think they became friends, and he visited quite often. He took photographs not only of the site and of matron and keeper Griffin and their family, but he also took photographs of the poor. None of the other 8 houses is so fortunate as to have the collection that we have of photographs, because without it, we could not have put this story together. So here are 2 examples of Connon's early photos. By the way, all of these photos and stories are in the book. 2 examples of Connon's early photos of inmates taken at the back of the house. And this is one thing we realized too. You might come in those front steps the first time to be admitted, but as an inmate, you were always at the back of the house after that. And as I'd mentioned about the aha that I had, this area right here, this was the back of the house. This was the courtyard where they did their daily activities of washing and laundry, hanging up clothing. Supplies would be brought in by wagon back here, but they lived at the back. And these 2 photographs, if you look at the woman on the left, so she is standing, she's like standing in the middle of the room here. Sir, I don't know your name in the blue shirt with the, yeah, can you stand up? I know you were hoping that you'd have to stand up in the middle of a talk, right? So, so that is about where this woman was standing. And Pat, if you stand up, Pat Weir, that is about where the man was standing when these photographs were taken. Thank you very much. You will be getting a free gift at the end of... You can see the barn over their shoulder, especially in the man's, but it's there in the woman's as well. That is directly behind this screen. And it is the original barn on this site. So I hope that helps you to orient. John Connon was standing behind them, and you can see they're both kind of looking up, and it's probably the same day. He's probably said to them, you see that maple tree? Just look up at that and just hold that for as long as you can while I take your photograph. And in the woman's slide on the left, you can see the woman behind with the apron, and she is heading into the back entrance, one of the back entrances of the poorhouse. So she's over here walking in. And she's probably said, as we would all do, I'm not going to get my picture taken, and off she goes. But on the right-hand side of both photographs, you are getting the stone wash house. The end of the stone wash house, that is the same as here on the book. So I hope that helps to give you a sense of that they were here in this space with us, maybe still are with us. And the end of that stone wash house, that was where the 3 jail cells were. Again, we were kind of horrified when we first learned about that, but they did expect that there were some people, that there was great suspicion of the poor, that they were going to be disorderly, disobedient. They were just here as fakers, so you had to punish people. It probably didn't happen that often, I don't think, but there were the jail cells built. And this is just, I think I started out with about 31 chapters and got it down to 14 chapters to make it livable for everyone. And yeah, just covering from the early years before the poorhouse was built, because that was one of the things that I was very interested in. Where did the poor go before the house was built? Well, they were in the county jail, is where they were, in Guelph. And we have found accounts of, for instance, a young woman, Flora Stafford from Harriston, about 15 years old, and she had had a baby. She was there with the baby in jail. And when she was let out, that very same day, she was seen in the market begging someone to take her child because she couldn't make a living herself and also care for a child. And she ended up here at the house. Another man, he was seen as, his name was James Woodrow. He had a neurological disease called St. Vitus's dance, but he was seen as also being a faker. He was in jail, let out. He was the Guelph Mercury reported, "Isn't that such a shame to see this man trying to walk down the street?" But the Mount Forest paper copied that and commented, "We think he's a faker. He's from our area." Well, he also ended up here and died within a few months of St. Vitus's dance. So, yeah, there was great suspicion. And people, yeah, started out as part of the penal system. This is just to give you an example of some of the final proofs of the pages. I don't know how others create a book. I've never written one, but the pandemic certainly affected the process. So once these chapters went through their many, many rewrites, archivist Karen Wagner provided the high quality visuals from the archives. And we wanted to augment all of these chapters with as many photos and documents as possible so that you get to see those original documents. You don't have to believe me, my interpretation, but it's right there. So I laid out the initial design of each chapter in Word program, and you can imagine, lots of you will work in Word, and you can imagine how awkward that was. And then Haley Johnson and I met many times, either by Zoom or in her office, trying to socially distance as we looked at the computer, and she laid it out in Publisher. And then it went to the communications department at the county, and it was laid out in InDesign, went through many edits and proofs, and handed over to Karen and Haley for that final publication process. Just going back to this table of contents, you'll see at the end that there's appendices, a map, and the county bylaw, the original bylaw from December 1877. And I just put one page of this. There's, I think, 7 or 8 pages in the book of this original bylaw. And I thought we would all find it really interesting if we all just read this out right now, all together, this whole thing. What do you think? Or we could have Doug Pletch here stand up and start reading from paragraph to paragraph. What do you think, Doug? I think I can. No, I just wanted you think a bylaw, how boring, who would read that in an appendix? But really, this is a very interesting document because it is talking about the duties of everyone. It lays out the rules and regulations for all the inmates, and if you broke them, this is what's going to happen to you if you broke them. And with the duties, just an example of the physician, when people were being checked coming in, when he was checking them, he was also supposed to check to see if they were faking when they should be. They called it feigning illness, when they should be out working. So it gives you a real flavor. I know Doug will read it now when he gets home. And again, just there's a 5-page timeline at the end. I think all of us, for me, who's been reading this stuff for 16 years, I can't keep it straight. So I think a timeline has been a really helpful appendix at the end. As I'd mentioned, there were 8 other houses, and this is the time period. You have this period in the late 19th century of great institution building, and it was seen to be more economical to institutionalize the poor. So these are the different counties that had rural houses and industrial farms. And that term industrial doesn't mean what we mean today as like industry, manufacturing. It means like the opposite of not to be idle, but to be industrious. And that's why these farms were built. And this was a very loose network of institutions. And we see in our visitors' registers that the officials and keepers and matrons would visit each other's houses to share ideas. And this, every institution, whether it was a prison, hospital, asylum, poorhouse, was established with an attached farm, with gardens, orchards, crops, poultry house. The inmates were expected to help with the chores, but the reality was that many were far too ill or worn out to help with the farm work. Dr. Groves, the poorhouse physician, wrote in his 1892 report describing them when they were admitted as physical wrecks. I think that says a lot. But one of the many missing pieces of this history puzzle, the committee reports never acknowledge what work the inmates carried out. And I find that, I just wish that I knew more about what they did. So these 3 inmates, they are standing at the corner of the jailhouse. And so we're right up here where this tripod is. The 3 of them are standing right in that place. It's a remarkable photograph. It's also on one of the panels on the landing, and you can see the crispness of their of every detail. And I often think that the story is in the stitches or in the patches or their shorn hair. They were shorn, to stop lice. The institutional wear of the 2 women. We don't know their names. You can see the man's hands, they're swollen with arthritis. He was probably a farm worker all of his life. The woman on the right may be developmentally challenged, and in all likelihood, her family cared for her, perhaps hidden away, until her parents died, and there was no one to care for her. The more I learned about the frailty of people who lived here, the more I wondered how they managed to care for all who found shelter at the house. I think any of you who have had a newborn baby in your home, just one baby, you know how that turns your household upside down. Or if you are a caregiver of an elderly relative in ill health or suffering from dementia. But imagine this household of 60 to 80 people, most of whom were in need. At any given time, there were infants and toddlers, newborn babies. Many of the elderly laborers were crippled from accidents or rheumatism. As I said, Dr. Groves described them as physical wrecks. Many suffered from what they termed it at that time senile debility, bedridden with diarrhea or paralysis, many admitted in the final stages of dying. I looked last night just at one of the inmates, the first inmate who was admitted, Joseph Benson, And when he died, it said the cause was 3 months of diarrhea. So can you imagine what that was like, not only for the inmates, but for the few people who were caring for them? There was the matron, 3 or 4 servants. You can see from this diagram of the house, up and down stairs, the bedrooms were on the top floor, the dining halls were on the bottom floor. Many, if you see in the photographs, many of people had canes. How did they do it? How did they get people up and down? How did you get down to get your food? If people were bedridden, with paralysis or something like diarrhea, there was a lot of lung and heart disease. How were they getting those meals, up and down to people 3 times a day? There wasn't an elevator put in this building till 1978. There was no such thing, of course. So it's just something, I just wanted to share some of those reflections that I've had about the house that I can't answer, but I think about. There were no drugs or few drugs to relieve pain or calm anxiety. And just how did they do it? And here you can see some of the staff, an older photograph of Matron Griffin on the left, and a nurse who was hired in the 1910s, Rebecca Williamson, and the Howes in the 1940s. None of these people are young. And we have records certainly of both Mrs. Griffin and I think Mrs. Allen in between, as well as Mrs. Howes. They had a terrible time keeping servants. And a lot of it was, can you imagine living in this building out here in the country, and the work was never ending. It must have been very difficult to keep staff. And for these people like Matron Griffin, there was no such thing as retirement. It was decades before there were any pensions. And with all of the care of the people, they were also preparing all of the meals, doing all of the laundry and the house cleaning, and they also made the clothes. The inspector and physician in their reports recognized the very heavy burden of work that the matron carried out, and council gradually increased her pay to show their appreciation. And although their work was never acknowledged in any report, I'm quite sure that the house could not have functioned without the assistance of the inmates themselves. And on the left, these photographs tell us so much. Again, these 2 women are on the cover of the book. It's also enlarged on the landing. And you can see the story is in those linked arms. You have the young woman on the left with Down syndrome, the elderly woman who has befriended her and perhaps become like a grandmother to her. And on the right, these 4 women were very often shown in photographs together. They lived together at the house over many years. The woman at the top left, the younger woman, Julia Ann Everson, arrived at age 7 years old in 1889 from Harriston with her pregnant mother and 2 younger brothers. She was the caregiver at home, 7 years old. She was cooking. It overturned on the stove and burned her legs very badly. And so they were brought to the house, then went to Guelph General to be cared for, and then brought back to this house. But Julia remained at this house until she died in her 60s. They were a family in deep crisis when they came in. But I think that she had a role at the house here throughout with her other friends. And I think that this photograph, photographs are always trying to tell us something. And I think it's that they were experienced helpers. It's just a snapshot. You can see the bed sheet tacked up behind. So someone took trouble to, to do this. But again, the help of the inmates was never officially acknowledged. And again, I wonder why. And perhaps it was simply that women were doing the role that everyone expected them to do in life. If we had to rely on only official records, we would have had no clue that there were any people of color at the house. And we've only been able to catch a glimpse of this through newspaper articles. In April 1878, a frequent visitor to the house, John Ireland, mentioned as he went around the house and did a tour and he talked about different people, and he mentioned the ancient negress, exceedingly depraved, occupying one of the small bedrooms. So this would be on the top floor in one of the small rooms up there. And there was no name. So I went through all of the records, and by the process of elimination, what I came up with was Mary Elizabeth Hill. And as I researched her, she was from Peel Township. She was born a slave, escaped with her husband in the 1850s after the, probably after the Fugitive Slave Act was passed in 1850. And this is her death certificate a couple of years after this report was made, or this observation by John Ireland, dying in 1880. It was an era of decidedly prejudiced attitudes. That was just the reality. So again, it's one of the puzzles to me that there was no discussion or any hint in any news editorial that objected to a person of color being admitted. So when I get the chance, now that we're past, in the post-pandemic time, I hope to be able to visit the other county archives records of those other 8 houses and just see, is there anything that I can, that gives us a clue about people's attitudes at the time. So I do hope more information will come up. And again, if we had to rely only on the inspector's reports or newspaper accounts, we'd think that the house was only inhabited by what they called the aged infirm or the respectable elderly. And this was definitely not the case. There were nearly 200 children who found shelter at the house before 1900, most often with their young mothers who were widowed, abandoned, or unwed. For unwed mums, like Beatrice Bolton, who is standing, and Maggie Zimmerman, who is seated, the social stigma of being an unwed mother, the shame of that at this time was such that many chose to remain in the house for the rest of their lives, as these 2 women did. Beatrice was admitted in 1895, about 25 years old. She had given birth at Guelph General Hospital to an illegitimate son. I couldn't follow it any further than that, so I believe he was adopted right out of Guelph General Hospital. Maggie was a seamstress from Drayton. Her daughter May lived at the house for 2 years and was adopted out in 1898. And as I said, these 2 women are often seen together, so I wonder if Beatrice helped Maggie raise May for those 2 years and grieved with Maggie when she was gone. There were about 50 children who were apprenticed out for farm and domestic labor. Did these mums have any say in these decisions? I've wondered a lot about that over the years. The records are silent. But I believe that in the absence of the male head of the family, and in the 19th century, the children were the property of the father. That was changing, but that was still the custom. So in the absence of the male head, I think that the House officials took on this role as the male head of the family and decided children's futures. And that future was as laborers. There is a whole chapter on the cemetery. It was refurbished, reclaimed in 2011, 2012. If any of you have not visited it, I hope that you get a chance to do that. It had been neglected and overgrown, and there were no names for people at the site, and we wanted to give them back their names. So all of those have been researched. They're all there at the site, and you can also look at them online and look at their death certificates as well. 271 people were buried in that cemetery. But I thought I would share tonight the peculiar issue of grave robbing as it applies to the poorhouse and how it became a battle between the local and provincial government. So very briefly, in May, at the very beginning of May, I think May 1st, 1880, I've jumped a little bit here. Very briefly, medical students were expected to provide a cadaver for their studies of anatomy, and the only option was to rob graves, and that did happen in our community. In 1883, the provincial government attempted to end this practice by allowing medical schools to claim corpses from public institutions, such as the county poorhouses. In early May 1885, 2 medical students knocked on the front door of the poorhouse with a telegram from the Toronto School of Anatomy, claiming the body of Daniel Robinson, age 79, who had died about 2 days before. Keeper William Griffin refused to turn the body over and buried Daniel Robinson. County Council stood by Mr. Griffin's decision, and Inspector Beattie made it very clear that the idea of turning over the body of an inmate filled him with disgust. The houses of refuge, they said, were county institutions, not funded by the province. Therefore, the province had no jurisdiction here. There were many legalities. The argument went back and forth for years until it was no longer an issue. When grave robbing was no longer an issue, medical students were not expected to have a cadaver. But one of the things I've wondered too, did the aging and ill inmates know that they were being eyed as potential specimens for dissection? My guess is that of course they knew. But the county stood strong in its decision to refuse, and no medical students ever knocked on the door of the poorhouse again. I always thought that was a very fine moment for the county. Yeah. By the 1920s, there was increased awareness of issues of poverty and the treatment of the aged. Social change was in the air, and we have a strong clue about this at the house. In the photo on the left, it's not too clear, I know, but you can see the House of Industry sign that was added to the new front entrance. It's in 1907. And the photo on the right is showing the words County Poorhouse over the original, upper part of the entrance. The words have been chiseled out and mortared over. And let's just let matron Christina Allen describe what her husband, Keeper David Allen, did one day in 1924. Incensed at the words poorhouse over the front door, he climbed a ladder and chiseled off the offensive words, much to the horror of his watching and scolding wife, who feared retribution from County Council. But the councillors supported his actions, and the suggestion that a new name be endorsed, something like Aged People's Home. That didn't happen for many years, but you can see that attitudes were changing towards issues of poverty and the elderly. The house went through many changes. You can see in this top left photo from about 1925 that the house was aging too. In 1956, the old wash house and jail cells over here were torn down and a new wing was added for elder care and dining facilities. The old house here was still in use up to 1971, but no longer met provincial standards for health and safety. The elderly moved to a new facility in Elora, the Wellington Terrace. This building was condemned and probably would have been demolished had it not been for the lobbying efforts of the Women's Institutes and the County Historical Society. In 1974, the County Museum moved from Elora to here. And I extend a big thank you to the Historical Society and the Women's Institutes, because without them, much of the story of the county's poor and vulnerable would have been lost without this building. There are so many layers to this story, so many things we still don't know and will never know. That's why the exhibit and the book are called If These Walls Could Speak, because we all want to know more. That's why I've left spaces around some of these photographs to represent the missing pieces to the jigsaw puzzle that we call history. I have always been drawn to this man's face. He is in the group along the wall. He is sitting in the second row about where Amy and Adam are sitting. We don't know his name. He was probably a farm laborer, maybe an immigrant with no family or a widower. His eyes tell us that he may have low vision. He appears to be leaning forward as if he is on canes. As I said at the beginning, he and his housemates would be astonished that we are here tonight, that we care to know about him. But if we do the hard work of searching and listening, we can get to know him. I think he is still with us in our long-term care facilities, in Wellington Hospice, in a shelter, or supplementing his pension with visits to the food bank. The people of the poorhouse were invisible to many, but we can catch glimpses of their lives in the bits of the puzzle that we can piece together. And we can hear their voices. We just have to keep listening. Thank you.
I think this is still on, yes. So Susan has graciously offered to answer any questions. Now, we only have this one mic, and we really want to make sure that the folks from Zoom can hear you. So I will run it out to you if you have a question, and I'll run it back to Susan to get all your steps in. So yeah, people at the back, keep your hands down. And everyone at the front. Oh, we've got a question. We have a question right here.
I was wondering about the children schooling. Did children go to school?
Thank you. So that's a good question. So if everyone heard that about the children's schooling. Oh, Adam, we do have another mic for... We wanted to see Kyle run, but... Yeah, so about their schooling, the original bylaw said that there would be a room set aside for schooling, and that didn't happen. So we are quite sure that it was the women inmates. I think there is one little clue to that they were probably in the women's day room, which is one of these end rooms on this floor. In fact, this at the far end here, where the quilts are, the children, young children were being schooled there. But many of the children were being sent out as day laborers. And that was something, one of the truisms of the day, to know your place. And that was their place, was to be domestic servants, farm laborers. So they might get a little bit of schooling. There's just the smallest bit of evidence that Julia Everson and her brother went to Allardyce School. But who knows, a couple of months before they were sent out to be apprenticed. Good question. Thank you.
Susan, I was interested to hear it was the county that provided social services in the 1870s, 80s, 90s. I wondered if you ever encountered in your research, when did the province come on board and help to fund social services? And perhaps you can help us understand what took them so long.
So that question, yes, about that balance between, or the evolution between local funding and provincial funding, and that's a really good question. As I had said with the grave robbing, they said, we are the funders, we are the owners of this place, you don't have any right here. That was in 1885. By 1890, the province was beginning to fund money, so they gave $4,000 to this house, and this hospital wing was built. And so every year you start having more and more of that. There was little bits of funding that were being given to to encourage houses to be built, or to upgrade them, or to add additions like this. And then we see in the visitors registers, for instance, you have provincial inspectors starting to come out, and they wanted to see that the standards were being met, and so that they would give more funds to the sites. So it took a long time. I mean, the federal government as well was very slow with recognizing any responsibility for elder care, pensions. It was still seen as late as the first decade of the 1900s. They were saying these elderly, or the working poor, they never save for a rainy day. That was the phrase that they were using. Well, how could they save for a rainy day? They were living on subsistence wages. Any kind of crisis in your life, the death or an accident, or the death of a breadwinner, was a catastrophe in their lives. So in 1908, the federal government slowly introduced one program that kind of failed, annuities it was called, that the elderly could put money into annuities. Well, they had no money to put into annuities. So we don't see pensions coming in. That didn't get passed until 1927, and that was much later than Europe, who had much stronger unions, worker unions, and that led to more funding for the aged in Europe much quicker than here in Canada. So it's a pretty complex issue, and I hope I have explained a bit of that in a couple of minutes. Alicia, there is.
Yeah, I was just wondering. Oh, thanks. I was just wondering if, sort of following on that, but going back in time, if you could just spend a couple minutes explaining about the state of poor relief before the county built the House of Industry.
Yes, that's a good question. So the state of poor relief before the poor house was built. The poor laws were the Elizabethan or British poor laws, when this became a colony in 1792, one of the things that they rejected were the British poor laws. They were hugely unpopular in Britain. So you have, in the early years of the 19th century, especially after the War of 1812, where you have veterans who are crippled from war injuries. You have private raising of funds and benevolent societies. So you have a great deal of that, religious charities through those early years. But then you have the county jail being built in 1840. So providing some shelter. Then you also have what was called municipal poor relief or charity committees. So if you were someone that was in distress, you could go to your village council, and it's all written up in the newspapers, $1 provided weekly for a few months to so-and-so, or some firewood. But it was never for a long period of time, and it was never very much, because you did not want people becoming dependent on poor relief. You know, there was a great suspicion of that. But I'm glad you mentioned that, Alicia, because it wasn't one following the other. There was not some omniscient, sort of centralized voice that was creating these policies. They were haphazard, they overlapped. Even when you had the poorhouse built in 1877, you still have municipal poor relief happening at the same time. There's a chapter on that in the book.
I just wondered if you came across any information in your research on the relationship with the Indigenous community at that time, or were there Indigenous residents here?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I did not. So were there any Indigenous people here? You know what? There could have been. Just like the 4 people of color, we only found that almost by accident, just glimpses in the newspapers. And I keep hoping, like, I'm always searching, always got my eyes open to see if we can find more. But as far as we know, and there was no place on the admission register for race. Yeah. Amy, did you have someone on Zoom, or?
We have a question on Zoom. Unfortunately, it keeps coming in and out, our connection. But Susan Reed has a question. Do you have any tips about how to tell meaningful and respectful stories of people like those inmates of the House of Industry who may, have so little written about them, or whose trace may end or disappear abruptly?
And do I have any tips on how to write about them?
Or research about them?
How to research them. Okay, yeah, so unfortunately, that's a great question, but a lot about the poor is written up. You're looking at jail records, for instance, records of vagrancy, even of prostitution, people trying to survive. And that would be something that person could look into, because that is the place that you will find records of the poor, just like here at this house. Yes.
Hi, this is such a sad story, but I have a question. Were there any success stories? Success stories where people were actually able to get back into the community, or were there people that were put in here wrongly?
Patty, can you think, so the question is, were there any success stories? I don't know that I would ever call it a success story. Kyle, can you just, so that we can hear him?
Yes, pardon me. During this time, the country was dirt poor, and the people were dirt poor along with it. And, perhaps people were put in here wrongly. Perhaps pregnant women were put in here wrong. Perhaps people with a sense about them were put in here wrongly. the situation may have occurred where their family just disappeared and they had no place to go, but they weren't a debilitated person. Do you have any information on that?
Well, the one that I can think of is Margaret Burgess. The earliest, thank you for the question. Her husband died in 1876 or 1877. He was a machinist in Fergus. She had 3 young children, 6, 4, and 20 months, 2 boys and a girl. They were the first children admitted to the house in December 1877. And one of the boys was apprenticed out by the age of 7, and they didn't fill in the records, so we don't know much about that. But she was able to leave. Her husband was a member of the Odd Fellows Society, so there were some widows' benefits. She was able to leave. She worked for the Odd Fellows Benevolent Society, and then she remarried. So that was one way out for a woman, was remarriage, and her family was reunited together. The 3 children all were reunited with her and her new husband. So whether it's, I guess it is. Yeah, indeed. Considering the times. Yes, that's right. For a woman, there weren't many options, were there? Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Now I am being told that we have time for one more question.
Can you? Let's make him run. Run.
Hi there. I'm just curious if the Beatty name ever came up. The Beatty family?
Yes.
On the hill here, they were there for like over 157 years, so, and he contributed a lot to this community. I was just wondering if his family helped out.
His family.
The Beatty brothers?
Oh, actually, this is, so the Beatty brothers is spelt with a Y, and this Beatty is I-E. John Beatty was spelt with, so it's not the same family. It's not the foundry, the industrial, manufacturer. That's correct. It's not that family, but they were from Nickel Township. I'm sure lots of you knew Dave Beatty. A longtime member of the historian, poet, historical society. And John Beatty, when he died in 1897, his son James Beatty became the clerk of the county and the inspector here. And then his son after that became the inspector and the clerk of the county. But yeah, it's not the same family.
Yeah, I just remember and hearing that, like his family and everything, they helped out a lot around here, contributed money.
Certainly, yes, indeed. Indeed. I did want to give away a book.
Oh, right. I also got overruled. There is one more question.
Sure.
But while I run, you can give away the book.
So this is from Stephanie Ferguson online. I spoke to a caretaker of another home who, as a child, had gone with his father to do charitable visits. He talked about persons with dementia who were treated with laudanum. Laudanum. Okay, sorry. Laudanum. Okay. Sorry, everybody. Was there any medical treatment available?
That's a good, very little. Laudanum, morphine, these derivatives of the opiates, opium, they were the only things available. The medicines that you would see advertised in the newspapers, a lot of them were, they were filled with whiskey, for one thing. That was the solution that kept what made it a solvent, the powders with the solvents. So, not a whole lot of help, I don't think. And the pharmaceutical industry was not regulated. So, you had a lot of quackery, if I can put it that way. Yeah. Shall I give away a book, Kyle? So, I am wondering, the first person admitted to the house, Joseph Benson, was admitted on November 5th, 1877. And I just wonder if anybody here has a birthday, November 5th. How long have you been planning? Do you know that's my husband over there? That's. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, no, that's November 5th. Are you the 4th? That's pretty darn close, isn't it? He probably came in, the midnight and on the 4th. Glad to give you. And if my husband tries to grab it from you, don't let him have it. I'm happy to sign it for you later as well. Thanks, everyone. Thank you for your questions, and thank you so much.
Now, before everyone goes, I know we just said thank you to Susan. I'm going to say thank you again. And on behalf of everyone at the museum, we love this museum so much. We love this building. There are so many, I would say, heroes of this building who have put so much of their lives between the Connon, John Connon, the Griffins, the Rosells, sort of you name it. There's so many people. And if they sort of gave this building life, you've done more than anyone between your work as a curator and your work on this book to give it a voice. And so on behalf of the entire museum staff, I would like to present you with this stuff. Thank you so much. I know all of the residents, all of the inmates here at the Poor House would be so appreciative of all of the work that you've done. So thank you so much on behalf of all of us. One more time for Susan, everybody. And as you're leaving, we are not entirely finished yet. Yes, please, stand up. You can stand. Standing ovation for Susan. Now, there is still plenty of food for people to get in the Nicholas Keith room that's just behind you here. The bar is still open. That's where I'm running off to next, to 10 Bar. So if anyone wants to get anything, there are washrooms on every floor of the museum if you need to use that. We also have programming staff from the museum who are on both floors of the museum who are there to answer any questions that Susan doesn't want to, can't, because she's busy, because she's going to be busy signing books over where the food and the bar is in the Nicholas Keith room. So if you have anything you'd like to say to her, get her to sign a book, please join her over there. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. This was lovely. This was wonderful. Thank you.